Hi, welcome to BA Brew. I'm Jonathan.
I'm Victoria.
And I'm Joe.
Today we're going to be talking about the professionalisation, and that's not an easy word for me to say, of the business analysis profession. So what we want to do is take a look at how is it that we set and raise professional standards in the profession. We're going to have a look at some of the routes for business analysis learning, training, qualifications and certifications. And I'm absolutely delighted to have Joe and Victoria here as a guests on the BA Brew. And Victoria, I think you're the first ever participant that's got their mug before.
I know. It's amazing.
So this is Jonathan having a little play with lean and trying to get things to the customer just at the right time. And I wish I could take all the credit. It's our logistics manager that's helping with all of this. So and I'm shocked as well, Victoria, that you've not yet eaten your Kit Kat.
It's still here, ready.
This is unheard of. This is new territory in terms of the BA Brew. Right, I'm going to start with a question then. Let's tackle the word professionalism first. What does it mean to be a professional? Let's start with that, and then let's expand on what does it relate to with regard to business analysis. So, Victoria, do you want to kick us off? What does it mean to be a professional?
Yeah, I mean, if you look up the definition, it talks about having a code of ethics. It talks about a certain level of training and expertise, and conducting your work in a manner that is recognised by others. So I think based on that definition, business analysis is definitely a profession.
It is.
Whether we're fully evolved, probably that's part of today's debate, isn't it?
Yeah, which we can get into. And then I use this word professionalisation, which isn't quite that. It's something different, is it? Do you want to unpack that one for us as well, Victoria, or should I throw on to Joe?
On to Joe.
On to Joe.
Professionalisation, then. What do we mean by that? What do we think that one means?
I think professionalisation is really about moving towards something. So I think with professionalism, one of the words that perhaps I'd also throw in there is standards, because there are expectations around the standard of a professional doing their work, right? And it doesn't matter whether we're going to a garage or a doctor, we expect a certain level of service of standards. And I think professionalisation is probably about those standards becoming, whether it's us achieving them or whether it's organisations raising them and setting them, but it's really about putting that standard down, I think, and people working towards it.
Yeah. I'm a big fan of standards, and we talked about this before, Joe, not least on your podcast very recently. Yeah. But one of the reasons I'm a big fan of standards is because they enable us to communicate. So if we are talking using the same standard, we can share knowledge and information. And I always think of music notation, and I had a failed attempt at learning the piano many years ago. So I did try and learn the notation for music. I didn't get very good at it, to be honest. I'm sorry. Got a bit of a cough. But you can write music for an opera or a classical piece of music, or for a piece of rap music, and you could use it using the same music notation. So it doesn't stop creativity; it just enables musicians to share knowledge. These are the notes to be played in this order at this level. This type of beat.
Speaking the same language, isn't it? It's about having that common understanding across a discipline that everyone can buy into and appreciate and contribute towards. Yeah.
I think it's really, really important. Right. So I'm going to ask you both then, what have you done yourselves in terms of developing your own professional standards, your own what have you done and I've chosen both of you. I asked you both for very pointed reasons because I knew that you've done lots in this space. Victoria, do you want to give us a brief synopsis of what you've done for your own professional development, and then how you've contributed to professional standards as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it probably started back at university. So I have a degree in product design, which is very unrelated to business analysis, but it got me into the kind of the academic world and that process of learning. I quite quickly realised that I didn't want to be a product designer. I stumbled on the profession of business analysis, as most of us do, and I took a degree in business administration and strategy. And from that, I discovered my love of business analysis and the process of change. And then I managed to get some support from work in terms of complete my foundation certificate in business analysis, and then went on to do the BA diploma. Was introduced to the BCS folks in a professional capacity, so I started working as a BA Brew examiner. Then went on to do the advanced diploma. I self-studied CBAP, which was quite difficult. I'm sure we'll come on to that later. And various other qualifications along the way, just because I love that process of learning. I love that process of arming myself with that information for those work situations. So I do work for the BCS occasionally as a courseware reviewer and exam paper reviewer as well.
Brilliant. And that route all the way back from learning at university through to your professional career and then giving back, that's kind of we can't clone you and not going to happen, but the more Victorias we have in the profession, the more the profession as a whole uplifts, which I think is testament to the work that you're doing in terms of helping to push forward the profession. So thanks, Victoria. Joe, do you want to give a similar such brief synopsis of your journey to being a professional business analyst?
I've had to scratch it down. I didn't realise I needed to bring my CV along today.
It's not an interview.
so I've, if we're going back to university, I studied business and finance at university, and interestingly for me in that, I sort of did some other jobs that were unrelated after leaving university, like being a finger and a removal man. But we won't go there. But when start to get back into sort of corporate work, it was funny, and business analysis work, it was funny looking back at college that I had done a few things that I was suddenly familiar with. So I did that. I then went on to complete a master's in computing for commerce and industry. And I guess that's the more sort of pure academics. And then alongside that, I've got my BCS International Diploma. I seem to be ambling towards my advanced diploma. We're just getting a little bit nearer and nearer. I'm a BCS oral examiner. I teach the courses very regularly. And another thing that I did along the way was I helped to co-author the IIBA competency model when that version 2, I think, a few years ago.
Yeah. And you've recently, I understand you've completed your CBAP. Was that self-study as well?
Yes, so my CBAP, yes, self-study, very little study, actually, but yes, self-study.
Yeah. So I'm going to answer my own question. So I did a politics degree, and on completion of my politics degree, thought, well, I need to get something a bit more vocational. So I did a master's in management, where I was introduced to things such as business analysis and information systems and lots of other subjects as well. I then went and got a job, and I started off working in insurance as an underwriter. I moved fairly quickly within a year into a business analysis training program. But I did my foundational studies with Assist, who I now work for. I'm a director of Assist now, but right at the start of my business analysis career, Assist trained me, and my first course was modeling business processes, which is a BCS aligned certificate. And I went on that course, and my boss assumed that I then knew everything about modeling business processes and threw me into a newly acquired business. And my task was to work out what we need to do in terms of their IT systems, because I'd done quite a short course. And it gave me the foundations, and I was able to apply it immediately in my job. I was taken in by what was known as the Information Systems Examination Board, the wheel that they used to have. I did my BCS International Diploma training. The majority of it was with Assist. I did the business analysis practice, the requirements engineering module, and then I did organizational context, I believe it was called. Did the oral exam. at the end, which was an interesting thing because I'd not done an oral exam since my French GCSE oral exam when I was 15. There's quite a gap between oral exams. I also did things like Prince 2. I studied TOGAF, the Open Group Architecture Framework, and I'm TOGAF certified, or certainly was a while back. And I also went away and did an MBA, so Masters of Business Administration. I did that part-time while I was working as a business analyst, business architect, and that was a lot of work. I, like yourselves, have been involved as an oral examiner with the BCS. So I've done over 15 years as an oral examiner. I'm currently the lead assessor for the Advanced International Diploma provided by the BCS. And just next week, I got notification yesterday that I've been invited to my final interview for the Expert Business Analysis Award. And I found out that I need to put together a presentation. So that's on my to-do list to create a 15-minute presentation for my Expert Award interview.
A small select group, Jonathan, isn't it? The Expert BA Award.
It is a very small select group. and I've been told that experts, by their very nature, are quite few in number. So yeah, it's quite a few people only a few people that got to that level is our understanding of it anyway. So that hopefully gives us kind of a nice broad remit across kind of how might you think about each of our individual respective journeys towards being professionals, at least from a certification qualifications side. Let's now dive into a little bit of the qualifications. And I'm quite interested to know what your thoughts are on the respective merits of the assessment methods for the respective qualifications that you've studied towards. So multiple choice questions, are they a good way of assessing business analysis skill and competence? What do you think? Joe, do you want to take that one?
I'm happy to take that one. I think multiple choice questions are very difficult to write. I get a lot of feedback from people when they do their sort of practice exams and things like that. And one of the things that stands out to me is ambiguity. Ambiguity is very difficult to spot until somebody sees it in a different light to how it was intended. I think it's difficult. I don't think it's impossible. I think it depends at the angle, the kind of knowledge, the kind of skill that you need to demonstrate by that question. I think that's very important. Of course, we got different multiple choice questions happening at different levels of exams across the qualifications. So the intent behind those questions is obviously key. I don't like them as much as I prefer a written exam, if I'm honest, with a case study, with the opportunity to demonstrate modeling a particular answer to a question, depending on whether it's a process model or whether it's a business activity model or whatever it is. So I don't think they can be quite as good as that, but I certainly don't think they're the worst thing.
Yeah. I think it I guess I know the answer to every question is it depends, maybe, but it depends on how well written that multiple choice question is, how well written is the question, the scenario, the answers, and is there any ambiguity in the question? It's a real skill to write them. Victoria, I think I'll share. I've been involved in writing multiple choice exam questions, but Victoria, I think you've got experience in that field as well.
Yeah, indeed. Certainly reviewing, submissions for various certificates. I think multiple choice questions can only take or to demonstrate the learning to a certain extent. You can't go beyond a certain level of recall or application with a multiple choice question. And I think, therefore, they're suitable for people with less in-depth knowledge and less in-depth experience, potentially. So I think, looking at what's available in the industry and where we use them, I think they're probably used well, at the lower end of experience, at the lower end of qualifications, in terms of that sort of seniority. So I think there is definitely a place for them. Can you demonstrate deep knowledge and learning from a multi-choice question? Probably not.
because you can't do the it depends and ask the scenario context around the question maybe that you want to do. And it's an interesting one because if we rely solely on multiple choice questions as an assessment method, there's a risk of criticism that perhaps the individual doesn't have tested their interpersonal skills, the ability to listen, the ability to speak clearly, to understand context, and those kind of things are really key for a BA professional. And if we only have multiple choice questions, we're not assessing some of those other broader interpersonal skills, which are absolutely fundamental, in my opinion, for us being a professional. We have to have very adept communication skills and the other skills around, interpersonal skills, time management, written communication, things around stakeholder relationship management, negotiation, facilitation, all of those things.
Yeah.
They're not as easily assessed by the multiple choice method. But I'm going to add that it is, in terms of an approach for the bodies that are putting together multiple choice questions, and I am part of this industry, it's much more efficient than someone reading and marking a written exam paper. And that takes a lot of time. There's an expense associated with that. And there's also a disadvantage that if you're sitting an exam, you don't get your instant result, which you do get with a multiple choice exam. And that's kind of, there's always a pro and a con against these different things. Now we've mentioned that some of us we're all involved in the BCS diploma scheme as oral examiners. And that's a bit of an anomaly. And before this pod, we've looked at PMI, we've looked at IREB, and we've looked at A4Q, Alliance for Qualifications, and IIBA, and their assessment methods relative to their respective qualifications. And one of the anomalies that's thrown out is this international diploma oral exam. That seems to be a one of a kind in terms of an assessment method, certainly across those bodies that I've referenced just then. What do you think the advantage is of having that oral exam for as an assessment method for business analysis skill and competence? Victoria, do you want to tackle that one?
I think you hit the nail on the head before, Jonathan. I think it's that demonstration of strong interpersonal skills, the ability to, present a confident case in our day-to-day jobs. That's a fundamental part of what we're doing. And I think for the diploma qualification, that represents a certain level of maturity, a certain level of expertise, that you should be comfortable having a professional conversation with two examiners. And that's the premise of the oral exam. And I think it's absolutely suited to the level that you're trying to attain with that diploma. And I think if we ever lost that in the future, it would be a loss to the profession, if I'm honest, because you have to be convincing, knowledgeable, articulate, etc., to pass that oral exam. And I think it suits our role and our profession really well.
Yeah. It's an interesting one because it is an anomaly relative to the other professional certification bodies that
IREB do one, don't they? IREB do an oral at the expert level.
Do they? I might have incorrect. Yeah. So do they have one? Do they? Which is that then therefore makes, if they've got an oral, that is testing those interpersonal skills as well, which is testament.
I think it's quite an advanced level that they put that in. But yeah, I don't know, do other professions sit oral exams? I know a good friend of mine, she's a QP. She had to go for a several hour oral exam to get her QP qualification.
What is a QP?
Oh no, you tested me. It's to do with the pharmaceutical industry.
Okay.
Around
qualified pharmacist, maybe. I have to Google that.
Yeah. I think it's a bit further up the chain than that.
Yeah.
But I know she had to sit a several hour oral exam. Wow. So I don't think it's unique to
business
academia.
Analysis. Yeah.
But maybe in the qualifications for our work, it might be.
Interesting. What about experience? Do you think that BA should get experience before studying towards their qualification certifications? Joe, what are your thoughts on this?
Another, it depends, I guess, Jonathan. But, I think one thing, the two words you use there, qualifications and certifications, I think sometimes we use these words a little too interchangeably. I think they are different things to each other. I think a qualification is something that you perhaps study when you're either before you get into a particular profession or during the beginnings as you get into that particular profession. And I think a certification is something that stamps your expertise, having been in that position for a while. So, you know, depending on what you look at, and I think this brings sort of forward that you sort of do need a strategy around your professionalism, your professionalization. You know, there is a lot of choice out of there. We're going to get different sort of value. These various qualifications and certifications aim to do different things. There'll be different popularities in different regions of the world, and it is a large investment of money and of time. And I think having a carefully sort of crafted look at what's available and the kind of benefit that these things will bring you is important before you decide.
And just as you're talking there, that kind of having a strategy for how do I become a better BA professional? How do I make sure my skills, knowledge are up to date and I'm working to agreed standards? Having a plan for success for that, absolutely key. And it does depend on where you live in the world and what is the expectations of your employer, your industry, for example. And there is a lot of choice out there. But I think doing some research on the available routes for qualification certifications really, really very useful. And the other thing that I think is really key is that you understand the origins of any bodies of knowledge that sit underneath these respective qualifications and certifications. And there are different bodies of knowledge. There's a PMI body of knowledge for business analysis. There's an IIBA body of knowledge for business analysis. There are various BCS textbooks that constitute a body, and I've heard them described as a body of practice rather than a body of knowledge. It depends on your view. Now, if we look at the International Requirements Engineering Board, they've got published handbooks. And you can go in, and I would suggest this is a really useful resource. Go in and look at those handbooks because it allows you to see the underpinning bodies of knowledge underpinning the various qualifications and certifications. And the other thing I think is really important is looking at when was that body of knowledge last updated, who are the authors, and what's the degree of credibility of that body of knowledge. Joe, any thoughts?
I want to
see the bay block behind you.
Yeah, it's there. No, I do want to. I want to jump in on this one a little bit. You used a word earlier. This word I love, and it's highly underused. But that's the word notation. And Victoria was right when she said, "Well, notation means language." And I don't think we do have one business analysis language. I think we have multiple languages. And as you've highlighted, it could be a particular handbook, a particular body of knowledge, or a particular body of practice. And, you know, sure, we may err towards one or the other, depending on the geographical region or the organization or whatever steers us that way. But I do think there's something to be said for actually having those multiple perspectives, understanding that there's, you know, they've got different structures, they'll give you different approaches, they'll have different perspectives. And I think if we follow one of them, we can become a bit sort of template driven, you know, and we believe that this is the one way, the only way, and we'll do it this way every time. I think there's definitely something to be said for having a bit of a mindset of saying, well, let me look at each of these. Let me take the best bits from them, you know, see what works, see what doesn't work, and trying to sort of grow with that regard, I think.
Yeah, I guess it's taking a growth mindset towards your learning.
Yeah. And I think that echoes the way our industry is as well. We practice business analysis in various contexts, in various industries, various domains. One size in manufacturing or financial services doesn't fit retail, for example. It's about having a broad spectrum of tools at your disposal to apply for the relevant context that you're working in. And particularly important if you're a consultant or you move around industries very regularly, that kind of stuff. I think you should bake that into your learning approach and your learning plan, so that you develop yourself in that broad context. I think it's really important for professional development.
Absolutely key, isn't it? One of the things I'm going to throw in terms of professional development that I think is really important is reflecting on your work. So reflecting on your work, what went well, what didn't go so well, what would you do differently next time? I think talking with mentors and coaches to help you reflect, or peers, can be really key for us improving our own individual practice. And if we can share knowledge around that with other BA professionals, that can also mean that we're learning lessons collaboratively, not just one or two people, but sharing those flaws, those strengths, whatever it might be that we've done.
We're quite blessed in our industry that we've got a number of regular events in the calendar that we can go and get those case studies, get that input, get that conversation flowing. Across the world. It's not just there's not a particular central place for it. It's genuinely across the world that we can go and get that exposure and that broader understanding.
And that talking with that believable professionals about the subjects and about the things we're trying to learn and apply, I think, irrespective of the forum that we do that, just by doing it, we're helping each other to uplift the profession, and I think the more that we do that, the better for each of us as individuals, and there's a collective benefit as well, which I think is really key. Right, we're coming towards the end of the pod now, so I just want to kind of see if there are any final thoughts. Joe, professionalization of business analysis, any final thoughts, hints, tips, anything you wanted to say that we've not covered? There's a can of worms there if we wanted to open it.
Well, I'm not going to open a can of worms as you're looking to close out, Jonathan. I'd probably just like to follow up on what you just said. I think one of the things for me, and I read this in a leadership book last year, and I thought it was advice that, I don't know, it might be common, but I'd never really considered it. But it's how well do you learn? So we've got these different methods of learning. I mean, we've talked about various certifications today at a high level, qualifications. Victoria's just mentioned conferences. Of course, there are handbooks, there are books, there are podcasts, there's YouTube. I mean, we really are blessed with an awful lot of sources that we can get our knowledge and skills from. And I think sometimes we just take them or we just go to them depending on what's put in front of us. But actually working out how you best learn. And by learn, I also mean retain, like how you keep it. And I think sometimes, to bring it a little bit full circle to these multiple choice exams, we might cram before, we might scrape the exam, and then we might promptly forget everything that we learned in those last few hours before. So as much as we've talked about qualifications, I think there's an awful lot of other opportunities to learn. And I think finding the way that works best for you by reflecting on, if you read that book, how much did you retain? If you crammed for that exam, how much did you retain? And just building that into your strategy would be worthwhile.
And retaining it then gives you a foundation from which to apply it in your practice. And I think that's a really important point there, Joe. So thank you. Victoria, any final kind of things that you wanted to say? Any final thoughts, any advice for anyone looking to develop their professional skills?
Yeah, I think through the years, it's kind of jumped out to me how much choice there is and how you can really tailor your professional development depending on where you are in your career. We've talked about BCS, we've talked about IBA, we've talked about RF. They've all got merits and particular areas that they're very strong at. And I think taking the time to do the research, maybe working with a mentor or your BA community, in the office, can really help you tailor that approach to growth, essentially.
Yeah. Brilliant. Great final thoughts. My final thoughts, I'm going to answer my own question, is do the work. You've got to do the work. You've got to do the research. You've got to do the study. look at the respective merits of your options, create a strategy for how you're going to develop your own professional skill sets that is tailored to you and your needs. I like to learn in bite-sized chunks. I like to work towards building my toolkit. I like talking with people to learn and reflect and practice, and then the best way that I learn is by applying the tools. So there's no point going on a course or listening to a podcast or reading a book if you don't then apply the lessons from it. And that applying the lesson in the real world is how I think we can develop our practice. And you might not get it right first time. You might be drawing something like a customer journey map for the first time with a stakeholder, and it might not land quite so well, but you've learned something from that.
Exactly.
So that the next time you draw the customer journey map or a process model or whatever it might be, you're better at it, and you're better because you've got more confidence and competence at what it is that you're doing. So I do think repeated practice and repeated kind of learnings as well can be really useful.
And it's good to fail. You know, we as humans, we don't like failure, but actually it's a massive learning opportunity, isn't it?
You do learn from it. And then because I've got a ridiculous amount of bias, because I'm a co-author of some of the BCS books, and I'm heavily invested in BCS qualifications and certifications, both personally and professionally. I would suggest, don't just think that there's only one shop out there for your professional route development. There's a big opportunity for people to learn, and go look at the advanced diploma modules would be my suggestion. You know, if you've got an interest in business architecture, for example, fantastic business architecture module there. If you've got an interest in a different area, so I do lots of work in service design, which I've been talking to Joe about recently. There's a whole raft of qualifications and training available to you in the field of service design. But it's kind of, you've got to tailor your approach for learning, the things that you want to learn about based upon your needs and what your organization goals and outcomes. What's your strategy? Which goes back to the point that Joe made earlier. What is your strategy?
But you're also now dropping in the ability that the BCS gives you to actually tailor to whatever it is that your aspirations are. Yes. It's not like a one size fits all. It's what are your interests? What are your strengths? Where do you want to go?
Yeah. And what do you want to learn?
What do you want to learn?
Yeah. Yeah. So there's an extremely biased, partisan kind of few thoughts, but I am admitting my bias right from the outset. But I just want to thank, I'm going to thank David, and I'm going to mispronounce his name. So I want to share, where did the idea for this pod come from? And David Pauzard asked this question to Victoria and myself in a pub after the Business Analysis Managers Forum. He asked,
"Oh yeah, you did. I remember that. Yeah.
What BA qualifications would you do? Which route would you go down?" We had a great discussion. And
we did.
I want to say thank you to David for raising that original question. And thanks to Victoria and to Joe for joining us today. I want to thank everyone for listening and for watching. And I do just want to say that if you like what you've seen today, please do like and subscribe and share the pod with others if you think it will be useful for them. So
it's a great learning opportunity.
Yes. Thank you.